إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для обеспечения полного и качественного устного перевода необходимо поступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vanuatu
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. I have the honor to call to order the 9th meeting of the 49th session of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review. At the outset, I would like to recall that all delegations must upload their oral statements through the online statement for signing up to the list of speakers, namely event, before the opening of the review, which they wish to address. Receiving the written version of oral statements in advance greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters, as well as that of the troikas and the secretariat, for timely preparation of the working group's reports after each review. We shall now start the review of Guinea-Bissau in keeping with Resolution 5.1 of the Human Rights Council. The review is based on the national report prepared by the state under review and the compilation of information by the United Nations, as well as a summary of information from stakeholders, both prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Before I give the floor to the delegation, allow me to inform you that interpretation from and into Portuguese will be available throughout this meeting. Interpretation into national languages is only possible in this room on channel 8 and not through UNTV. I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Degol Mendes, Director General for Justice Policy, Ministry of Justice and Human Rights, to introduce the delegation and the national report. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Membros da mesa, como disse a senhora Presidente,
as the Vice President stated, I am Degol Mendes. I am Director General for Justice Policy. And for this meeting, we have a delegation with the Minister of Justice and Human Rights and the National Commission for Human Rights, as well as the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Excellency, Madam Vice President, distinguished representatives of the member states of the Council, distinguished members of the Troika, observers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor and satisfaction that I take the floor on behalf of Guinea-Bissau at this important meeting, at this 49th session of the Universal Periodic Review. I wish to convey greetings and thank all members of the Council for their efforts and for the work done to build fair societies based on the values and principles of the rule of law. My country will continue to uphold multilateralism and the central role of the United Nations in defending human dignity. Excellencies, the delegation that I have the honor to lead has the following members: Fernanda Maria da Costa, President of the National Commission for Human Rights and Citizenry; Fatima Camara, Legal Advisor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Communities; and Awa Camara, Director of Studies and International Human Relations Department. I would like to share with you the measures taken and the results of implementation of the recommendations of the third cycle for my country. The meeting 5 years ago was an excellent opportunity to measure progress made and identify the outstanding challenges. We welcome the positive spirit that prevailed on that occasion and committed to implementing the recommendations. This result is an overview of the progress made and the challenges facing Guinea-Bissau in relation to its work to promote and protect human rights and implement public policies for human rights over the past 5 years. It reflects my country's expressed commitment within the third cycle and the results of interaction and the recommendations received during that meeting. We are convinced that dialogue with this Council will once more lead to a fruitful, constructive interaction that seeks best practice and solutions to contribute significantly to improving human rights indicators, as was the case with the presentation and discussion of previous reports. Based on the recommendations of the third cycle, progress has been seen, including reactivation of the Ad hoc Commission for Constitutional Review, development and adoption of various important instruments for the justice sector, including the civil proceedings and criminal proceedings codes, which await adoption by the National Assembly. The goal of the exercise was, inter alia, to improve the existing legal framework and raise the response capacities of the judicial institutions, overcoming the limitations that arose in applying the law. Corruption is one of the main obstacles to governance. We have developed a national strategy to combat it, adopted in April 2022, and the government is now focusing on training anti-corruption workers and providing training in ethics and integrity for application of the law. Seeking to make it clear that crime does not pay, we adopted a decree in December creating an asset recovery center. In 2020, through efforts by the Justice Ministry, we assigned the members of those units which seek to recover assets arising from crime in order to encourage everybody involved in that area and public officials to observe integrity. We adopted a national anti-drugs and anti-organized crime strategy, as well as a plan of action to 2027. And in that connection, we carried out the second round of peer review on money laundering in 2022, seeking to reduce our country's risks in that area. Given the commitments to protecting children, a number of legal instruments were developed, including the National Policy to Protect Children, the Civil Registry Code, the Interim Law on Systems for Protection, and the Comprehensive Child Protection Code. That code seeks to address our country's international commitments and bring national legislation in line with international instruments that have been ratified. For our country, human dignity is an absolute value, which is binding on our state. Under our constitution, there are guarantees provided for citizens. Restrictions on freedoms, rights, and guarantees can only occur in exceptional circumstances. From another angle, I should emphasize that structural reforms are underway, seeking to guarantee access to justice for all, regardless of economic status. We are making efforts to strengthen the institutional framework of the Centers for Access to Justice and the legal framework more generally, developing new drafts of the organic law on local courts, the organic law on the Supreme Court, the law on cybercrime, the data protection law, the civil registry code, the mediation law, and the traditional justice law. The government has made every effort in terms of budget and partnerships to provide broad legal assistance, allowing families in our country to have access to legal aid. We have adopted a new labour code. This strengthens protection of workers and provides the conditions for decent work. My country, with United Nations support, through the Peace Consolidation Fund, developed the first national strategy for human rights and citizenship and a plan of action to 2026. That instrument reflects the human rights situation and the overall vision of what needs to be done to address the existing structural challenges. My country committed firmly to promoting and protecting human rights and the rule of law and strengthening basic freedoms. The National Human Rights Strategy sets out the roadmap to provide the necessary improvements. We have a National Human Rights and Citizens Commission, which brings together representatives of public and private institutions and functions as a national independent institution. Recently, new statutes have been adopted. On female genital mutilation, the National Committee for Elimination of Harmful Practices is updating the national strategy to eliminate FGM up to 2030. To implement an inclusive policy, Guinea-Bissau has adopted a national strategy for the inclusion of persons with disabilities, the National Strategy for Inclusive Education, the draft basic law on the protection, promotion and inclusion of persons with disabilities. In the health sector, we have developed a strategic plan for the Operational Centre for Health Emergencies that allowed our country to address COVID and two outbreaks of disease, namely polio and measles, in 2022. The National Plan for Response to Polio and the Plan to Combat Measles, the National Plan to Develop Human Resources for Health, the National Strategic Plan for Community Health, the National Strategic Plan for the Health Information System, which is awaiting implementation, and the development of the National Plan for Health Development number 3 up to 2030.
Na área da educação, destaca-se, entre outros.
In education, we have the National Strategy for Children Out of School and the relevant budgetary implementation plan, as well as the launch of the pilot phase of the accelerated formal education program in 2 regions, the autonomous sector of Bissau and Oyo, as well as the National Strategic Plan for Inclusive Education to 2028 and the relevant national strategy for inclusive education. I should point to social protection and the efforts to strengthen the protection of decent work through adoption of the National Policy for Social Protection and the relevant strategy, which seeks to implement our state's commitment to strengthening protection against risks that can threaten the right to a decent life free from fear of extreme poverty, hunger, or difficulty in accessing essential services such as health and education. In combating violence against women, we have created a strategy on the right to a life free from violence, strengthening the mechanisms to protect victims of gender-based violence and promote the rights of women in our country. The project has created a space for dialogue among ministries, civil society organizations, public and private stakeholders in the relevant sectors in order to promote joined up political thinking, to develop and present draft laws, to dialogue and to advocate with the political authorities to bring sustainable change in combating gender-based violence and promoting gender equality. In fulfilling international obligations undertaken under various conventions and under the recommendations of the 3rd cycle, we have developed a number of national reports to the treaty bodies, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This was submitted in December 2024. And the report on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The government has also drawn up a national development plan to 2023 and is developing a new national development plan under the Ministry for the Economy and Regional Integration in order to develop various projects. In cooperation, my country has made efforts at various levels to protect human rights, including the strategic program for cooperation between Portugal and Guinea-Bissau to 2025 on education, culture, justice, security and defense, health, social affairs, labor, agriculture, fishing, energy, environment, infrastructures, economy and finance, cooperation with the United Nations for sustainable development for Guinea-Bissau up to 2026. In the judiciary, beyond the legal reforms, work is underway to improve the human and material conditions for judiciary workers, with a focus on upskilling, provision of upskilling for judicial workers, improving judicial infrastructures, broadening the judicial network, and strengthening the mechanisms to guarantee the independence of the judiciary. However, while this is a summary of the progress made, there are still outstanding challenges to be overcome, and we will continue to work to strengthen human rights in our country. I would like to point with satisfaction to the United Nations involvement and contribution in creating the Office of the Ombudsman and this institution which works to strengthen protection of human rights. We also point to the contribution made in creating the national mechanism for the development of national reports to the treaty bodies. We welcome the involvement of civil society and the valuable contributions made within the consultation process for the various reports. This brings considerable added value to this exercise. In conclusion, on behalf of the State of Guinea-Bissau, I would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the considerable contributions that have been made to support my country, making it possible in the past and this year to produce various national reports to the treaty bodies. We reiterate our commitment to working and sparing no effort to implement shared ideas to strengthen and consolidate the rule of law and human rights in my country. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Director.
Thank you very much, Director. We will now start the interactive dialogue. I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 1 minute and 30 seconds for all. As is customary, political, bilateral and territorial issues must be left out of our discussions. Furthermore, the terminology of the United Nations must be used in referring to states and territories. Only the use of the words recommend or recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of the statements are included in the recommendations section of the report of the working group. I would like to remind you likewise that the Human Rights Council strongly rejects any act of intimidation or reprisals against individuals or groups who cooperate or have cooperated with the United Nations and its representatives and mechanisms in the field of human rights. We shall now move to a list of speakers, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Madam Vice President, Ukraine welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks for the presentation of its national report. We commend the efforts undertaken by Guinea-Bissau to strengthen its human rights protection mechanisms, in particular through the adoption of important legislative and regulatory texts. These are meaningful steps toward ensuring greater alignment with international human rights standards. Ukraine encourages Guinea-Bissau to continue building on this progress and to fully implement the recommendations it accepted during its previous UPR cycle. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to recommend 1. To enhance measures aimed at the eradication of discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. 2. To continue to strengthen existing laws to ensure that they uphold the principle of equality. 3. To take all necessary steps to prevent all forms of violence against children, including child labor. We wish Guinea-Bissau a very successful review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias. A
Thank you. I call on the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The United Kingdom welcomes Guinea-Bissau's efforts to improve human rights, including the protection of women and girls. We remain concerned about the weakening of public and democratic institutions and limitations placed on opposition groups. We recommend that Guinea-Bissau, 1, ensures the restoration of public and democratic institutions, including the National Assembly, as swiftly as possible. 2, takes all possible action to protect civic space and the right to peaceful assembly. 3, promote the participation of women and girls in a democratic process for the upcoming presidential and legislative elections. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Tanzania.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The United Republic of Tanzania warmly welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau to the 49th session of the Universal Periodic Review. We commend the government of Guinea-Bissau for the submission of a comprehensive national report and for its continued effort to promote and protect human rights, as recommended during the third review cycle. We particularly applaud the government for ratifying the International Labour Organization Convention number 87 of 1948 on freedom of association and protection of the right to organize, a significant step towards promotion of labor rights. In the spirit of constructive engagement, the United Republic of Tanzania recommends the government of Guinea-Bissau to, first, implement internationally agreed norms and strengthen state institutions to enhance child protection in all its forms. Second, reinforce the juvenile justice system. And third, develop and implement strategies to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. We wish the Republic of Guinea-Bissau a successful review and reaffirm our support for its ongoing efforts to uphold human rights. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
I thank you. I now call on Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Vice President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and commented on presentation of the national report and on the efforts made by the country to protect human rights. In a constructive spirit, we recommend ratifying an international convention for the protection of all persons against enforced disappearance. That was 1. 2, ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in line with the recommendation made by Uruguay earlier. And 3, step up efforts to ensure services and information for sexual and reproductive health, including adolescents, and address gender-based violence through strengthening national capacities, improving supply chains, and assessing existing strategies and programs. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this 4th cycle. Thank you. Thank you. I now call on Vanuatu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vanuatu welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. Vanuatu particularly welcomes the National Strategy for Inclusive Education 2023 as part of the implementation of measures for the promotion and inclusion of persons with disabilities in the education sector. We welcome the National Development Plan 2020 to 2023, with priority given to agriculture, water resources, sustainable forest management, and the adoption of clean energy sources. Vanuatu encourages Guinea-Bissau authorities to continue the efforts and would like, in a constructive dialogue, to make the following recommendation. Continue improving its birth registration procedures, including by raising public awareness and facilitating and expediting access to birth registration centers. One of the wishes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau was successful. UPR, I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I recognize the delegation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you very much, Vice President, and our greetings to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau. We thank them for the presentation of their report. We welcome the cooperation with UPR mechanism and believe that it's voluntary mechanisms and not those that are imposed that bring the best results for human rights. We commend the implementation of the National Human Rights Strategy and the Strategy on Citizenship and the Plan of Action for 2022-26, as well as the National Committee to Combat Trafficking. We also welcome the setting up of national institutions to combat climate change, such as the Biodiversity and Protected Zones Institute, the Competent Authority for Environmental Evaluation, and the Environmental Institute, as well as the Fund. We respectfully recommend, 1, to continue implementing public policies which are inclusive and to ensure the human rights of the most vulnerable populations, making children, the elderly and persons with disabilities a priority. 2, to strengthen national institutions set up to promote and protect the human rights of the people, ensuring they have the technical and financial resources which are necessary to make them effective and efficient. 3, to continue implementing all measures to guarantee the right to development of all its people. Thank you.
Continúa.
Thank you. I give the floor to Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zambia welcomes the esteemed delegation of Guinea-Bissau to the 4th cycle of the UPR and thanks them for the presentation of the national report. We applaud them for the progress made in implementing recommendations made during its 3rd cycle review, including the adoption of a national social protection strategy and policy 2025 to 2029. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Zambia wishes to make the following recommendations. 1, enact legislation guaranteeing 12 years of free primary and secondary education. 2, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Vice President. Zimbabwe welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau and commends Guinea-Bissau for its efforts in implementing recommendations made during the last review. In the spirit of dialogue, we recommend that Guinea-Bissau, 1, strengthens its legal and institutional frameworks as well as national mechanisms that safeguard human rights. 2, strengthens its policies and mechanisms on promotion and protection of the rights of the children and the rights of people living with disabilities. And 3, continues implementing policies that ensure equitable access to education, healthcare, social protection of vulnerable communities. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. I thank you, Vice President.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Armenia welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks for presenting a national report. Despite existing challenges, we commend Guinea-Bissau's efforts over the past 4 years in strengthening its human rights framework, in particular adoption of Human Rights Action Plan in 2022, as well as the new national plan to prevent and combat trafficking in human beings. In a constructive spirit, Armenia recommends Guinea-Bissau: 1, expand efforts to combat child exploitation and trafficking, including the full enforcement of anti-trafficking laws. 2, promote gender equality by ensuring the implementation of gender parity law in political and public institutions and by strengthening measures to combat gender-based violence. In conclusion, we wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. Australia thanks the delegation of Guinea-Bissau for their presentation. Australia welcomes Guinea-Bissau's active engagement in UN human rights mechanisms, including with treaty bodies and the UPR. However, Australia remains concerned by increased restrictions on civic space and a lack of progress towards ending sexual and gender-based violence. Australia recommends Guinea-Bissau: 1. Accelerate efforts to establish an independent national human rights institution in compliance with the Paris Principles. 2. Enhance access to justice for victim survivors of all violence and abuse against women and girls, including through education campaigns that aim to reduce social stigma, training for the judiciary, and criminalisation of participation by medical professionals in acts of female genital mutilation. And 3, uphold rights to freedoms of expression, assembly, and association, including by investigating alleged attacks on journalists and by allowing peaceful demonstrations to take place. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Belgium welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and wishes it a fruitful and constructive UPR. We appreciate Guinea-Bissau's commitment to improving the human rights situation, as demonstrated by the recent submission of 4 reports to the treaty bodies. Given the remaining challenges in the country, Belgium recommends Guinea-Bissau to 1. Intensify efforts to implement existing legislation criminalizing sexual and gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation, by strengthening the judicial system and conducting awareness-raising campaigns among traditional and religious leaders. 2. To provide training for traditional authorities on human rights to ensure compliance of traditional justice with international human rights standards, as well as developing a legal framework for recourses to traditional justice. And 3, continue to protect the right to freedom of expression, including press freedom, by decriminalizing defamation and insult in accordance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Botswana.
Madam Vice President, Botswana warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau to the 4th cycle of the UPR process. We thank the delegation for presentation of their comprehensive national report. Botswana notes Guinea-Bissau's submission on her progress on the implementation of recommendations from the previous cycle. Though still awaiting adoption, we welcome the various legal and legislative reforms which have been created for the protection of human rights. Notwithstanding the progress made, we note some challenges still remain and encourage Guinea-Bissau to continue her efforts in the following recommendations. 1. Intensify efforts to finalize the establishment of the National Human Rights Institution according to international standards. 2. Accelerate the efforts to form the national mechanism for implementing, reporting, and follow-up recommendations received during the cycles of the UPR review. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review outcome. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Obrigado, Senhora Vice-Presidente.
Thank you, Vice President. Brazil welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau. We commend the adoption of the National Strategy for Human Rights and Citizenship to 2026 and the progress reported by the government of Guinea-Bissau in human rights obligations and standards and their transmission to state institutions and society at large. We congratulate Guinea-Bissau on adopting health plans and strategies. These need to be allocated necessary resources to ensure a gradual expansion of health services, including reproductive health and maternity support. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends 1, to promote and protect children's rights with particular attention to the adoption of the Child Protection Code, the expansion of birth registration, the increase of compulsory education age to 16, and the implementation of measures to combat corporal punishment, malnutrition, child marriage, and child trafficking. And 2, ensure resources to implement actions to combat gender-based violence and eradicate female genital mutilation. Brazil is chair of the Guinea-Bissau configuration of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, supports the integration of a human rights perspective in projects funded by this mechanism. Thank you very much.
Obrigada.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Burkina Faso.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Our delegation wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, and we commend them for the presentation of their national report as part of this fourth UPR cycle. We welcome the legal and institutional reform undertaken by Guinea-Bissau in the human rights sector. We particularly welcome the putting in place of a national human rights and citizenship strategy with its plan of action for 2022 to 26. We also commend the establishment and the work of the ad hoc commissions to draft treaty body reports. In a constructive spirit, we wish to make the following recommendations. 1, to continue efforts to strengthen and support cooperation between social services authorities and civil society stakeholders in order to provide support for victims of trafficking. 2, to continue efforts to strengthen the judiciary with a view to effectively implementing legislation to combat gender-based violence. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Burundi.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Burundi wishes a cordial welcome to the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we welcome the national report which has been submitted, which details progress made in the protection and promotion of human rights since the last review. My delegation welcomes the early warning mechanism established to combat trafficking for labor exploitation and forced marriage, which is already showing positive results. We welcome efforts for child protection, notably by efforts to speed up and increase birth registration to avoid further vulnerability and prevent risks of ill treatment and exploitation. We note with satisfaction that Guinea-Bissau now has a national social protection policy with an implementation strategy and a plan of action, but it also has a single social register which is currently pending approval. In a constructive spirit, we would like to make 2 recommendations. First of all, to continue efforts to implement the national policy to ensure education for all and combat school dropout rates, particularly in rural and underprivileged areas. And secondly, to redouble efforts to ensure the economic empowerment of women and promote their participation in decision-making. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Cape Verde.
Obrigado, Senhora Vice.
Thank you, Vice President. Cabo Verde warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks it for presenting the national report. We commend the efforts made on human rights, and in particular, the adoption of the national strategy to combat corruption to 2030 and the comprehensive national plan to combat drugs and organized crime and the relevant plan of action to 2027. In a constructive spirit, Cabo Verde recommends 1, adopting measures to strengthen the administration of justice and ensure the independence of the judiciary and lawyers, and strengthen the state's institutional capacity to fulfill human rights obligations. 2, take all necessary measures to ensure effective implementation of the national strategy to combat corruption and protect human rights defenders. 3, strongly commit to promoting equal opportunities for men and women, both in public and private sectors, and ensuring access by women to microcredit and other forms of economic empowerment. We wish every success to Guinea-Bissau in this UPR. Thank you.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Cameroon.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We extend a warm welcome to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, led by the Minister of Justice and Human Rights, Maria Silva Monteiro, and we commend the country for the presentation of their national report as part of this fourth UPA cycle. We note with satisfaction significant progress that has been made by the country in terms of the promotion and protection of human rights, notably the adoption of the National Human Rights and Citizenship policy with its plan of action for 2022-26. This speaks volumes about the specific intent to promote and protect human rights. In a constructive spirit, we wish to make the following recommendations, nevertheless. 1, to strengthen protection of women and girls by putting in place effective mechanisms to combat gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation and child marriage, and ensure there is access to justice for victims. 2, further promote the right to education by increasing financing for the education sector and by taking measures to combat school dropout rates amongst girls. We offer our support to Guinea-Bissau and wish them the best of success in this review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Canada. Thank you. Canada thanks Guinea-Bissau for its participation in this Universal Periodic Review. We congratulate Guinea-Bissau for all the efforts it's been making in terms of child protection and implementing its first strategy and plan of action on human rights. Canada wishes to recommend that Guinea-Bissau does the following. 1, protects the right to peaceful assembly by not intervening in peaceful demonstrations, by lifting the suspensions of to freedom of peaceful assembly, and by revising law number 392 of April 1992 on freedom to demonstrate and of assembly in order to ensure compliance with international standards. 2, ensure the effective implementation of the law on equality, number 4 of 2018, by revising its election framework pursuant to legal requirements, and to ensure that governance structures more inclusive. And 3, that it establish a national human rights institution pursuant to the Paris Principles. Thank you.
A continuación.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Chad.
Voy a continuar con el siguiente.
In their absence, I will move to the next speaker, and I therefore give the floor to the delegation of Chile. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Chile wishes to commend Guinea-Bissau for the adoption of its new national plan to prevent and combat trafficking in 2024 to 28. And we also commend them for the approval implementation of Law 4 of 2018, which promotes equal participation of women in public life and decision-making. We also welcome with satisfaction amendment of the regulation of the National Commission on Human Rights to ensure that its operations are pursuant to the Paris Principles. In a constructive spirit, we respectfully recommend the following. 1, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances and the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. 2, to consider adopting measures to guarantee freedom of expression and the protection of human rights defenders. 3, to continue to make progress in protecting the rights of women and girls and eradication of gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation, increasing available resources to investigate these cases and to strengthen the judicial system. And 4, to improve proceedings for birth registration, raising awareness amongst the population and ensuring better access to civil registry offices. We wish the country best of success. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of China.
Madam Vice President, China welcomes the constructive engagement of Guinea-Bissau with the fourth cycle of UPR and appreciates its achievements in promoting and protecting human rights since the previous UPR. For example, it has actively promoted the environment by including response to climate change into its national strategy and formulating climate action plan. It has protected the rights of specific groups of children, persons with disabilities, and women. It has set up a social security system aimed at poverty reduction and a decent life for its population. It has promoted socio-economic development and guaranteed basic human rights. In a constructive spirit, China wishes to make 3 recommendations. 1, continue to increase input in health, better guaranteeing the right to health of the people, especially those in poor areas. 2, continue policy measures on poverty reduction, reducing the gap between the rich and the poor, and increasing the income of vulnerable groups. 3. Continue to promote equal enjoyment of right to education for children and eliminate any form of discrimination against women, thus better guaranteeing the rights and interests of specific groups. China wishes every success to the review of Guinea-Bissau. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Colombia.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Colombia wishes to thank the distinguished delegation of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau for the presentation of their report, and we wish them the best of success in this UPR. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1, to ratify the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture and to adopt legal and policy measures to strengthen the independence of the courts and other judicial system officials. 3, to strengthen the birth registration campaign to ensure that all children are registered. 4, to establish the minimum age of marriage at 18, and then to broaden opportunities for safe and regular migration and ensure better protection for migrants. 5thly, we recommend redoubling efforts to heed the cases of internal displacement caused by climate insecurity, particularly in island communities. And 6, we recommend adopting legislative and administrative measures to guarantee significant political participation by women, ensuring they are more represented in parliament and in executive level at local politics. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Congo. Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of Congo wishes the warmest of welcomes to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we commend them for the presentation of their national report. My country welcomes the fact that there's a much better legal and judicial framework for the protection and promotion of human rights in the country, which is pursuant to the recommendations accepted at the last Universal Periodic Review. In order to see the country continue these efforts, we would like to encourage Guinea-Bissau to grant particular attention to the situation of children with disabilities. To conclude, we wish to make the following recommendations to Guinea-Bissau. 1, to redouble efforts in order to improve the standard of living of vulnerable groups. 2, take appropriate measures to ensure there is an effective care afforded to children who are abandoned and who live with disabilities. We wish Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this UPR review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Costa Rica. Thank you very much, Vice President. My country wishes to thank Guinea-Bissau for its report and for the efforts they've been made to put in place and implement the National Strategy on Human Rights and Citizenship and its plan of action for 2022 to 26. We recommend the following. 1, to prevent and combat all forms of violence against women and girls, particularly female genital mutilation, child marriage, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. 2, to ensure that there are fewer inequalities within the education system and dropout rates. And we also recommend ratifying the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, and we recommend ratifying the 1989 ILO Convention. We wish Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this 4th UPR cycle. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire. Madam Vice President, we wish a sisterly greeting to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we commend the country for the adoption and implementation of the National Plan to Prevent and Combat Trafficking in Persons 2024 to 28. We also welcome measures taken by the authorities to combat FGM, domestic violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime. Our delegation encourages the government to continue its efforts, particularly as regards revising the Constitution constitution to make sure that human rights obligations are entirely enshrined. In a constructive spirit, we make the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. 2, to establish a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. To conclude, Côte d'Ivoire wishes Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this review. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Cuba.
Gracias, señora vicepresidenta.
Thank you very much, Vice President, and a very good morning to everyone. We cordially welcome the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we recognize the commitment of the country to the Universal Periodic Review. We particularly note the adoption of the Labour Code and the National Human Rights and Citizenship Strategy and the Plan of Action covering 2022-2026. We recognize the cooperation of the country with the special procedures, including the country visit of the Special Rapporteur on trafficking, especially women and girls, and the Special Rapporteur on the human rights to drinking water and sanitation. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1, to continue efforts to ensure proper implementation of the National Development Plan 2020 to 23 and finalize the adoption process by the National Assembly of the Child Protection Code and the amendments proposed to the Civil Code, the Civil Code of Civil Proceedings, and the Code of Criminal Procedure and the Criminal Code. 3, to continue technical assistance and cooperation in the human rights sector. We wish Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this review and in the implementation of the recommendations it will accept. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you. I give the floor to Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cyprus welcomes the delegation from Guinea-Bissau and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We commend Guinea-Bissau for acceding to the Aarhus Convention, establishing a national strategy for human rights and citizenship, as well as a National Child Protection Commission to guarantee the comprehensive protection of children's rights. We encourage the government to proceed with the implementation of existing legislation and strategies that promote and advance human rights and fundamental freedoms. Cyprus would like to make the following recommendations. 1, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. 2, implement comprehensive measures to combat multiple forms of discrimination against women and girls, including female genital mutilation, child marriage, intimate partner violence, sexual abuse and femicide, as well as to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 3, ensure access to continued quality education by increasing budget allocations to the education sector and creating community-based programs that provide economic support to families, thus reducing reliance on girls for domestic labor and encouraging their continued education. And 4, ensure the appropriate legal training for security forces and judicial authorities with a view to guaranteeing the protection of citizens' rights. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Democratic Republic of the Congo warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report. We commend the efforts made by the country since the last review, particularly in the human rights sector. Amongst others, we've seen the adoption of a national plan to prevent and combat trafficking for 2024 to 28, and a national strategy and plan of action for human rights in 2022. In the spirit of a constructive dialogue, the Democratic Republic of the Congo wishes to make the following recommendations to Guinea-Bissau. 1, to finalize the adoption of the framework law for the protection, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. 2, to complete ratifying the Convention on Discrimination in Education. To conclude, my delegation wishes Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this UPR process. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Equatorial Guinea.
Señora vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Vice President. Our delegation wishes to warmly welcome the delegation of Guinea-Bissau to this fourth UPR. We offer our thanks for the oral presentation and the national report. We welcome the efforts made by the government of Guinea-Bissau to strengthen protection mechanisms in the human rights sector. And we welcome that it's the first country outside the pan-European area to ratify provisions relating to access to justice in environmental affairs, the Aarhus Convention, amongst other instruments. We recommend the following: 1, to strengthen the rights of persons with disabilities; 2, to prevent and combat trafficking; 3, to ensure there is better access to drinking water in vulnerable areas; 4, to ensure better procedures for birth registration amongst vulnerable groups; 5, to ensure easier access to sanitation and education. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this UPR review. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau so that they can tackle the comments and questions that have been asked thus far. You give the floor. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by making some comments and observations regarding the various statements delivered. Firstly, I would like to refer to strengthening measures to combat discrimination on the grounds of sex and to combat violations of children's rights. There are various mechanisms in our country. Notably, there is an early warning system on human trafficking in order to prevent trafficking of children in particular for the purposes of exploitation. With regard to sex discrimination, there are specific laws to combat domestic violence, gender-based violence, reproductive health laws, and a law on family planning. So there are a series of laws and institutions working in this area, and they have produced very commendable results. I would also like to refer to one of the comments made by the United Kingdom. This concerns reactivation of the National Assembly. A date has already been set for elections to be held in November. Once the legislative elections have been held, the Parliament will be fully reactivated, and thus we will have a full array of working democratic institutions after those elections. At the same time, we will have other elections in November for the presidency of the Republic. So this means we'll be electing a new president and new members of parliament to ensure that we have the full set of working democratic institutions. I would also like to comment on the recommendations concerning women's participation in political life. We have the law on parity, which sets quotas for women's participations, notably on the electoral lists for each party's running for election. So if the law is correctly enforced, we will have significant representation of women in Parliament. So political parties must make a commitment to respect that law. Otherwise, the Constitutional Court will reject the electoral list presented on the grounds of the law on parity. I would also like to refer to the comment concerning complying with international standards on child protection. When it comes to implementing international child protection standards, Guinea-Bissau has reviewed the civil registration code with a view to ensuring that all children are registered at birth, regardless of where they live or their economic condition. When it comes to complying with international standards as well, no fees are charged for birth registration of children up to the age of 7. This was something which was included in the new civil registration code so that we can address the prevailing situation in the country. We have also adopted the Code for the Comprehensive Protection of Children so that they're fully protected in health, education, and employment. So the Code for the Comprehensive Protection of Children sets out the standards for all sectoral policies. It refers to employment, education, human trafficking, domestic violence. So this is a code which does indeed provide comprehensive protection. It also seeks to protect children on the move. This means to say that even if children leave national territory, they are protected because they must carry documents which can be checked in order to ensure that children will not fall victim to human trafficking or any other situation which may jeopardize their physical integrity or survival. We know that human trafficking today requires careful attention in order to ensure that children are properly protected and supported, in order to ensure that the safety measures in place are effective. Now, with regard to gender-based violence now, Guinea-Bissau has spared no efforts in this domain. We have been working in partnership with specialized NGOs. So there are various partnerships that we have with NGOs, including the Human Rights League and the National Network to Combat Gender-Based Violence. So these partners help us with awareness raising, training, and improving the skills of staff working in this area. We could not achieve so much as a state alone, so we join forces with other organizations in order to achieve the recommended goals in combating gender-based violence. This is really a cultural issue. It's deeply ingrained in our society. And so we must work not only on the legal front, but also raise awareness. This is something which we believe will be effective in changing the mindset of people when it comes to this matter. I would also like to refer to the law on inclusive education. Guinea-Bissau has set a priority of ensuring that children attend school. So we have an education for all policy. I haven't got the exact figures, but we do not charge any fees for basic education. So we're trying to promote access to education for all, regardless of children's economic and social condition. So we have the strategy for the education sector, as well as a number of laws which foster the implementation of this policy. We strive to ensure that the principles of equality, the principle of equality is respected in inclusive education. We must ensure that everybody has access to this basic public service. when we look at the education sector, we also try to ensure that we include persons with disabilities. So we have a national strategy for the inclusion of persons with disabilities. We must ensure that these people see themselves as full citizens and that disability does not constitute an obstacle to integration into society. One of the recommendations was to criminalize female genital mutilation. It is criminalized already. Hence, we have also been addressing the issue of establishing a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. So we have reviewed the statutes of the existing commission, but as you know, the Parliament is not currently operational, so we cannot submit the statutes to the Parliament. The law has been adopted by the government cabinet. But once the elections are held, we will be able to submit those statutes to the Parliament for adoption so that we have a national human rights institution which is fully independent and impartial and aligned with the Paris Principles. I would also like to refer to the training for judicial staff and those working in the area of traditional justice. As you know, the administration of justice does not cover the whole of the country, so traditional justice still has a role to play. This means to say that many conflicts are mediated through traditional justice mechanisms. That's why it is important to train those people who are responsible for the administration of traditional justice. This is the way of ensuring that traditional justice is administered along the same principles as the official justice system. And this also means that people will not be deprived of access to justice because of the place where they live or because there is no court close to their area of residence. So between 2019 and 2023, we have promoted a restorative justice project. The idea is to promote different conflict resolution mechanisms. This is then something which is included in the justice reform policy covering the recent period. We try to promote alternative mechanisms for conflict resolution. Now, when it comes to promoting the civil registration network, notably for birth registration, Guinea-Bissau is currently expanding the civil registration network so that we can increasingly achieve our aims in this area. Currently, we are implementing civil registration units in hospitals so that children will be registered at birth. We're also undertaking civil registration campaigns in schools so that we cover those children who do not currently have access to health services. And we want to make sure that they will be registered. So we have a national civil registration strategy, which is producing some excellent results with a great increase in the registration of children. And so we do hope that in the coming years, we will greatly increase the proportion of children who are registered. We are getting support from UNICEF in this domain. This is helping us implement the civil registration strategy. We are currently striving to implement the mobile registration campaign. This means that civil registration units will visit remote areas in order to cover those children who cannot make the journey to a fixed civil registration unit. We are also pleased to note the recommendations concerning the strengthening of the human rights network, notably with regard to women's empowerment and human rights defenders. We are drafting a law on the protection of human rights defenders. This is one of the measures to ensure the security of those who defend the rights of others. So we are working with civil society organizations, in particular the Guinean League on Human Rights. So we're working in close cooperation in order to carry this project forward. We have the necessary funding in order to implement this in the near future. We're also strengthening the independence of the judiciary. There are a number of laws which are awaiting adoption. Any laws on the judiciary require parliamentary approval. As Parliament is not operational, these laws are still pending. They're awaiting adoption. We have a new law on the organization of the courts, the regional courts, the sectoral courts, the law on the Supreme Court, and all of these laws strive to ensure greater independence. This is because we have noted a number of shortcomings when working on these bills, so we're trying to overcome them in order to ensure that there is a more robust legal framework for the judiciary, which will provide it with greater independence. When it comes to protecting children from early marriage and the school dropout rate and discrimination against girls and women in access to education, there are some measures to combat cultural mindset. So we're working in partnership with NGOs in order to raise the awareness of traditional community leaders. We've been working in the villages and rural communities in order to raise awareness on this matter. When it comes to women's health, we have the Reproductive Health and Family Planning Act, which is designed to combat child marriage. That means to say that there is a minimum age set for marriage of women. If girls are forced into marriage below the legal minimum age, then those responsible for this can be punished under the Reproductive Health and Family Planning Act. We also criminalize domestic violence. And there is also a law to combat people being forced into certain acts. Now, when it comes to the ratification of the Convention to Combat Enforced Disappearance, the government has highlighted this as one of its priorities, but there are two stages to any ratification. We cannot complete the ratification because the Parliament is not operational. Were the Parliament to be meeting, then we would be able to proceed and complete the ratification of the Convention to protect all persons from enforced disappearance. With regard to our investment in the health sector, this is one of the sectors with the greatest budget. We're building new hospitals and we're also extending the health network to cover more communities. So we have seen an increase in the state budget for the health sector with the construction of these new health facilities and specialized units for certain areas' health. We have a referral hospital which is being built, and we have the hemodialysis unit as well. So we can say that the health sector has benefited from an increased budget. I would also like to comment on the constitutional review process. Efforts are ongoing, but currently we have to wait for a new parliament to be invested so that we can complete the constitutional review. This will make it easier for our institutions to function, and they will be better regulated with a view to guaranteeing greater stability of governance. I would like to conclude by saying that when it comes to the National Development Plan, this is a strategic document which reflects the state's priorities, and it also sets out the priorities which we hope to meet within a certain time frame. We're currently working to complete the National Development Plan so that we can move on to its implementation. We hope that this will improve the state's responses, and also we hope that we will be able to strengthen the capacity of all national institutions. So these are the comments that I wanted to make so far with regard to the statements delivered and the recommendations which have been made on our report. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're now going to pursue our interactive dialogue. The next speaker is Eritrea.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the high-level delegation and the Director General for Justice Policy. We welcome the adoption of the National Strategy for the Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in 2022 and the National Strategy for Inclusive Education in 2023. We believe that these are crucial steps toward ensuring equal access and participation in education and public life. The bill on the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities currently under review, as stated in the report, reflects commendable ongoing efforts to strengthen legal frameworks. We also note the comprehensive child protection policy and long-term action plan, as well as the education sector plan 2017 to 2025. Which prioritizes the inclusion of children with disabilities. We humbly recommend accelerating the adoption and implementation of the Disability Rights Bill while fully understanding and respecting the challenges faced. Notably, the government's response to health emergencies through the National Polio Response Plan and Measles Control Plan, we note has resulted in a remarkable 99.6% immunization coverage among children under 5 through organization of mass vaccination campaigns and other routine immunization activities. We recommend to continue strengthening routine immunization systems to maintain high coverage and being able to quickly respond to emerging health threats. We support Guinea-Bissau's continued efforts and wishes you success in the ongoing fourth cycle review. We thank you.
Muchísimas.
Thank you. I call on Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau to its fourth UPR and thanks for the additional information provided today. We welcome the progress made in the health sector and encourage further efforts to strengthen primary health care. We are concerned about ongoing challenges as to the right to education. Therefore, we recommend to 1. Ensure that all children, particularly also girls, have access to education. 2. Fully implement laws that criminalize all forms of gender-based violence. 3. Ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health services. 4. Set the minimum age for marriage at 18 years. 5. Ensure full realization of freedom of expression and media freedom, online and offline. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ethiopia.
Thank you, Vice President. Ethiopia warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau to the fourth cycle of the UPR working group session and express appreciations for the delegation's national report and oral presentation. Ethiopia commends Guinea-Bissau for the significant progress it has made in promoting human rights through its efforts to implement the recommendation from the third cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. In the spirit of constructive engagement and dialogue, Ethiopia offers the following 2 recommendations. 1. Continue efforts to ensure inclusive, equitable, and quality education for all in line with international standards and national development goals. 2. Continue to strengthen and expand the implementation of the National Social Protection Policy with a focus on improving access to essential services for vulnerable groups, including women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. Finally, Ethiopia wishes every success to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and its engagement with the UPR working group. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is France. Thank you, Madam Vice President. France welcomes the delegation from Guinea-Bissau. We'd like to thank you for your report. France has taken note of positive measures taken by Guinea-Bissau since the last UPR. France would like to make the following recommendations in a constructive spirit. 1. Promote the protection and support for particularly vulnerable people and strengthen the implementation of those provisions on the right to sexual and reproductive health and to combat discrimination against women. 2. Pursue and strengthen training programs for human rights defenders. And 3. Ratify the Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances and the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute. France wishes Guinea-Bissau every success in its UPR. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Gabon. Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Gabonese delegation welcomes the delegation from Guinea-Bissau, and we'd like to thank you for presenting your national report. We're pleased to note that the government has undertaken reforms of the judicial sector, notably through drafting a number of different texts and building new buildings in Gabu and Ingore and recruiting new judicial officials and judges. We'd also like to underscore the policies to combat transnational organized crime and drug and the national anti-corruption strategy running up to 2030. We welcome this meaningful progress and we have the following recommendations. 1, strive to adopt all the bills on justice sector reform to step up efforts to combat corruption, notably by striving to implement the National Anti-Corruption Strategy 2021 to 2030. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Gambia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Gambia warmly welcomes the delegation of the sister Republic of Guinea-Bissau. We commend Guinea-Bissau for the efforts made to improve its human rights framework, including the adoption of the National Social Protection Strategy and Policy 2025 to 2029, submission of reports to human rights treaty bodies, and step towards the establishment of a national mechanism for reporting, implementation, and follow-up of human rights treaties. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, the Gambia offers the following recommendations. Expedite efforts to complete the revision of the Constitution through an inclusive and a transparent process to entrench its human rights obligations. Expedite the process of transforming the National Human Rights Commission into an independent institution in line with the Paris Principles. Strengthen efforts to prevent and combat all forms of violence against women and girls through the effective enforcement of laws against gender-based violence and the provision of support services to survivors. Enhance measures to protect children's rights, particularly by adopting the Comprehensive Child Protection Code and ensuring compulsory access to free and quality education for all children. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Georgia thanks the delegation of Guinea-Bissau for the presentation of the national report. My delegation takes note of the efforts undertaken by Guinea-Bissau aimed at implementation of the recommendations received during the previous cycle. We commend the government of Guinea-Bissau for the adoption of the National Strategy and Action Plan on Human Rights in 2022. We also positively assess the steps taken for submitting reports to treaty bodies as well as presentation of country's first voluntary national review on the implementation of the SDGs. Here, Georgia would like to recommend 1. To intensify steps towards prohibition of corporal punishment of children at schools. 2. To continue efforts for increasing the availability of safe, potable water and adequate sanitation facilities, particularly in rural areas. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau a successful UPR. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Germany.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Germany welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau. Germany appreciates steps taken by the government of Guinea-Bissau to curtail corruption and organized crime through the National Anti-Corruption Strategy adopted in 2022 and the opening of the model police station in Gabu in 2024. However, Germany is concerned about continued restrictions on the freedom of assembly and the press. Germany urges Guinea-Bissau to strengthen its efforts in combating corruption and in combating gender-based violence, especially regarding female genital mutilation, and recommit itself to strengthening economic, social, and cultural rights. Germany therefore respectfully recommends to 1. Reform the justice and law enforcement system to enable decentralized universal access to adequate legal protection. 2. Ensure that justice and law enforcement institutions can work free of political and economic influence. 3. Repeal legal regulations and administrative practices that restrict the free exercise of the right to assembly and critical media reporting. 4. Develop a national strategy and application plan to combat sexual and gender-based violence and ensure the prosecution of perpetrators. 5. Strictly enforce laws criminalizing FGM, particularly in high-prevalence regions such as Gabu and Bafata, and include its eradication in the national strategy and application plan. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ghana welcomes the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau to the 4th UPR cycle. My delegation commends Guinea-Bissau for its efforts in addressing the problems of drug use and trafficking, particularly through its collaboration with Portugal under the new Strategic Cooperation Program 2021 to 2025. Additionally, Ghana recognizes the dedication of the government of Guinea-Bissau to improving access to education for persons with disabilities, as demonstrated by the adoption of the National Strategy for Inclusive Education, which is an important step towards promoting inclusion within the educational system. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Ghana recommends that Guinea-Bissau ratifies the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. 2, addresses the challenges of illegal deforestation and ensure that environmental protection laws are upheld. And 3, devises a national plan to combat child labor. Finally, Ghana wishes Guinea-Bissau a successful review. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of the Holy See wishes to thank Guinea-Bissau for its engagement in this process. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, recommends that the government, 1, strengthen its commitment to the protection of human life from conception to natural death in all circumstances, including by ensuring the effective investigation and prosecution of crimes, including trafficking in human beings and organ trafficking. 2, strengthen the independence of the judiciary and improve institutional accountability as essential foundations for peace and reconciliation. 3, fully protect fundamental human rights, including freedom of religion and belief, freedom of expression, and the right to peaceful assembly. 4, encourage all political and social actors, according to their respective competencies, to engage in sincere and inclusive dialogue for national reconciliation and peace conflict resolution, recognizing that lasting peace is not achieved through force, but through patient dialogue and mutual respect. The Holy See wishes Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of Iceland. Ambassador.
Madam Vice President, Iceland welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and its national report. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iceland recommends the following. First, criminalize fully all forms of gender-based violence. Second, eradicate female genital mutilation. Third, end child, early and forced marriage. Fourth, raise the minimum age for marriage for girls to 18 years. Fifth, provide comprehensive access to quality sexual and reproductive health services across the country. Sixth, legalize same-sex marriage between consenting adults. And seventh, ban conversion therapy. I wish Guinea-Bissau all success for its review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on India.
Mr. President, India warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks the delegation for presenting the national report. We commend the progress made by Guinea-Bissau since its third UPR. We recommend the following to Guinea-Bissau. 1. Continue taking efforts to mitigate, adapt, and respond to impacts of climate change. 2. Continue cooperation with the United Nations and other relevant organizations to enhance national legislations and ensure their alignment with international human rights standards. 3. Continue strengthening mechanisms to combat all kinds of violence against women, including female genital mutilation. We wish Guinea-Bissau the very best. I thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Indonesia warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and appreciates its ongoing efforts to advance the promotion and protection of human rights, particularly through the adoption of the National Strategy for Human Rights and Citizenship and its action plan. We also acknowledge positive developments in the areas of social protection, education, and judicial reform. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Indonesia wishes to recommend the followings. 1. Continue efforts to establish an independent national human rights institutions in line with the Paris Principles, building on the recent progress with the National Human Rights Commission and the Planned Ombudsman's Office. 2. Increase investment in the education sector and implement targeted strategies to increase school enrollment and combat illiteracy, particularly among women and rural communities. 3. implement comprehensive strategies to combat child malnutrition by expanding nutrition programs nationally and promoting food security for vulnerable households. Indonesia wishes Guinea-Bissau every success in its UPR process. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Iran welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and commends their continued participation in the UPR process. Iran appreciates Guinea-Bissau's efforts to advance and protect the human rights of its people, in particular the right to education, health, as well as its work against human trafficking. We acknowledge these efforts and offer the following recommendations. 1. To take urgent action to combat trafficking in children. 2. Improve labor inspection capacity to identify and refer cases of exploitation. 3. Expand safe and regular migration opportunities and strengthen the protection of migrants in countries of destination. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful UPR process. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Iraq.
شكرا السيد النائب الرئيس. يرحب وفد العراق.
Thank you, Vice President. Iraq welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau. It commends the efforts made to present this report and the fact that it is timely regardless the efforts facing the country. As regards the implementation of the recommendations from last cycle, we recommend in constructive spirit ratifying the Convention to combat discrimination in education, to continue efforts to implement the national strategy to combat human trafficking to 2028, and provide legal assistance in health and the social sphere. We wish every success to the delegation.
La delegación de Irlanda tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I call on Ireland.
President. Ireland welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland welcomes Guinea-Bissau's efforts to advance human rights domestically and commends progress made since the last UPR cycle, including the adoption of a national strategy for human rights and citizenship, as well as the related plan of action. We look forward to their full implementation. We also welcome Guinea-Bissau's accession to the Aarhus Convention and the resulting increase in public awareness of and participation in decision-making on environmental matters. However, Ireland is concerned by the continued shrinking of civil society space in Guinea-Bissau and regrets the lack of progress on creating and maintaining a safe and enabling environment for civil society actors and human rights defenders. Ireland recommends that Guinea-Bissau, 1. Guarantee respect for the rights to freedom of opinion, expression, assembly, and association, including by investigating all reports of crimes against civil society actors, human rights defenders, and journalists, and by bringing perpetrators to account. 2. Take necessary measures to eliminate gender-based violence, including by ensuring timely prosecution of perpetrators and fully enforcing the existing ban on female genital mutilation. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this UPR cycle. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of Italy. Ambassador.
Signora Vice President, we thank the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau for the presentation. Italy welcomes the recent adoption of a new national plan to prevent and combat trafficking in human beings for the period 2024-2028 and seizes this opportunity to offer Guinea-Bissau the following 4 recommendations. 1. Ensure an electoral process that allows the people of Guinea-Bissau to express their vote freely and without constraint. 2. Adopt measures to ensure freedom of expression and association, including by ceasing persecution and arbitrary detentions of journalists and political and environmental activists, and by guaranteeing the independence of the judiciary. 3. Increase efforts to combat all forms of discrimination and violence against women, including domestic violence, and take further steps to combat child early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation. 4. Adopt all necessary measures to protect children, particularly from trafficking, and ensure access to quality education for all, especially girls. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador. I call on Japan.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Japan warmly welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau to this session. Japan welcomes the positive measures taken by the Guinea-Bissau, including the steps to regulate the Land Act to ensure equal access to the land for all persons, especially women, and to ensure accountability for the violation of land rights. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Japan recommends that Guinea-Bissau, one, continue and strengthen policy to uphold the independence of the courts and other justice actors and to protect the rights to fair trial, to continue and advance effort to eliminate gender-based violence and discrimination against women and girls, with a view to ensuring the implementation of the relevant policy for which sufficient resources have been allocated. And three, further strengthen measure to protect civic space by ensuring the fundamental freedom and right to freedom of expression, including through ongoing legislative reforms. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Muito obrigado. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Jordan.
Thank you, Madam. السيد الرئيس، نرحب برئيس وأعضاء.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thank it for presenting the national report. We commend the progress made in implementing the recommendations from the last cycle and the efforts at political and institutional levels with the new development plan to 2023. We also commend the work with the United Nations to pursue sustainable development to 2026 with a focus on the protection of human rights. We recommend, one, continuing constructive cooperation with human rights mechanisms within the United Nations, including the OHCHR, the special procedures, and the treaty bodies too. Continue supporting the national strategy for the inclusion of persons with disabilities, adopted in 2022. Finally, we wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Lesotho.
Thank you, Madam President. Lesotho warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau to the 4th UPR cycle and thanks Guinea-Bissau for presenting their national report. We positively note the significant increase in birth registrations among children under 5 years of age due to a series of government initiatives. In addition, we'll applaud the drafting of the code for the comprehensive protection of children and hope the code will be swiftly adopted and implemented. These efforts by Guinea-Bissau are crucial in ensuring that children can receive essential social services and protection. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. One, take further measures to reduce the primary education dropout rate, especially for girls and children in rural areas who experience the highest dropout rates. Two, continue providing health services to prevent, screen, and treat HIV and AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, with a focus on providing health services for the most vulnerable populations. Three, take greater steps to guarantee that investigations into corruption proceed in an unbiased and transparent manner. Lastly, Lesotho wishes the Guinea-Bissau every success with implementing the accepted recommendations from this review. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Malawi.
Madam Vice President, Malawi welcomes the Republic of Guinea-Bissau to this review and thanks the delegation for the comprehensive report. Malawi is honored to be a member of the Troika for this review. Malawi notes the progress made in the promotion and protection of human rights since the last review exemplified through the strengthening of the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework for Guinea-Bissau 2022 to 2026. We commend the government of Guinea-Bissau for the ratification of international human rights instruments, such as the Convention of Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision-Making, and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters 2023, and the Freedom of Association and Protection of Right to Organize Convention 1948, number 87 of the International Labour Organization in 2023. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Malawi makes the following recommendations to Guinea-Bissau. 1. Consider ratifying the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. 2. Continue to revise existing laws to ensure that they serve to uphold the principle of equality and non-discrimination. And 3. Continue cooperating with UN human rights mechanisms. We wish the Republic of Guinea-Bissau all the best at this review. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Malaysia thanks Guinea-Bissau for the presentation of its national report. Malaysia acknowledges the progress made by Guinea-Bissau in advancing economic, social, and cultural rights, particularly in access to water, sanitation, health services, and employment. On this note, Malaysia recommends the following. First, strengthen support for women in the informal sector, including through improved access to microcredit and sustainable income-generating opportunities. Second, allocate adequate resources for full implementation of the National Social Protection Policy 2025 to 2029. And third, implement affordable housing initiatives for all, including providing full access to basic necessities. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Maldives.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the high-level delegation from Guinea-Bissau to this fourth cycle review and thanks the delegation for their presentation today. The Maldives welcomes the efforts of Guinea-Bissau to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and its pledge under Human Rights 75 initiative. Additionally, we recognize Guinea-Bissau's policies for the comprehensive protection of the children for the period 2021-2032, which covers specific aspects of the rights of the children with disabilities. In constructive spirit, the Maldives makes the following two recommendations. 1. Continue efforts to guarantee widest possible access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. 2. Strengthen efforts to ensure girls have access to and remain in school, enabling their continued education. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Mali. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mali warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau for this fourth cycle. We congratulate the government of Guinea-Bissau on the progress made in birth registration despite the challenges. We also welcome the strengthening of the health policy following the development of the Strategic National Committee Health Policy, a plan with measures to raise authorities' awareness to zones at risk of epidemics and national disasters, and measures for community support for emergency zones. In a constructive spirit, we recommend revising the national health policy and developing a strategic follow-up and assessment document to measure the impact of budgetary allocations on the sector, and modernizing infrastructure and strengthening capacities for obstetrical care by community healthcare workers. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of the Marshall Islands. Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of the Marshall Islands welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks them for the presentation of the report. We commend Guinea-Bissau for its continued efforts to mainstream human rights across national policies, including through the adoption of a national strategy and action plan on human rights in 2022. Acknowledging its vulnerability as a LDC and a fellow SIDS, we note the 2021 submission of its revised NDC and welcome the integration of gender considerations. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following. 1, adopt comprehensive human rights-based approaches in environmental, climate change, and disaster risk reduction policies, and align the 2025 NDC submission on these principles. Number 2, strengthen efforts in the fight against impunity and victims' access to justice by considering ratifying the Rome Statute of the ICC, and 3, continue its efforts to reduce the infant and maternal mortality rates, including by improving access to nutrition during pregnancy and early life. We wish the delegation every success during its 4th UPR cycle. Kumaldada, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Mauritania.
السيدة الرئيسة
Thank you.
بوفد الجمهورية الإسلامية الموريتانية عن خالص تقديره لجمهورية غينيا بيساو على تقريرها.
My delegation welcomes that of Guinea-Bissau and thanks it for presenting the national report. We commend the efforts to promote and protect human rights despite the existing challenges. We have noted with appreciation the progress made at a number of levels with restoral of the constitutional legislative framework, including constitutional revision, the adoption of laws, including the labor law, the child protection code, and the participation of civil society. We welcome these efforts and encourage Guinea-Bissau to continue them. We recommend continuing efforts to promote the independence of the judiciary and accelerate the adoption of a national human rights institution, keeping with the Paris principles. Also, ensuring the role of civil society in follow-up to recommendations. We thank Guinea-Bissau for its cooperation and wish it every success in its efforts to upholding the rule of law. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. A continuación.
Thank you. I call on Mauritius.
Monsieur le Président,
President, the delegation of Mauritius welcomes the high-level delegation of Guinea-Bissau, this brotherly country present at the UPR. We commend its initiatives to promote and protect human rights. In a spirit of cooperation, Mauritius recommends the following: ratifying the Convention to Combat Discrimination in Education, as recommended by UNESCO, and pursuing efforts to amend the law on marriage to set the minimum age for marriage at 18. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. I now call on Mexico.
Gracias, señora
Thank you, Vice President. We thank Guinea-Bissau for the report and recognize its efforts, in particular the national strategy to combat FGM to 2030. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1, ratifying the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance. 2, provide training on human rights to police and to law enforcement officials. 3, establish the mechanism provided for in the law on parity to monitor and ensure the application of the law and provide greater participation of women in politics. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Montenegro.
Madam Vice President, Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau. We acknowledge a number of measures undertaken to simplify and improve the availability of the birth registration procedure within local communities and related to border control system and regional cooperation, thus reducing risks of child exploitation and trafficking. However, serious challenges are still present when it comes to child vulnerability and its exposure to various forms of discrimination and violence. We commend the progress made in meeting its obligation to regularly report to the UN treaty bodies and encourage the government to keep on this positive momentum. Montenegro makes the following recommendations: to harmonize legal provisions on the age of completion of compulsory education of children and the minimum age for admission to work in a way that would guarantee the elimination of the risk of economic exploitation of children aged 14 to 16, to enact legislation strictly prohibiting corporal punishment of children in daycare centers, both in early childhood and for older children. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful UPI cycle, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Morocco.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My delegation welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. Morocco welcomes the efforts deployed by Guinea-Bissau to fulfill its international commitments in the field of human rights, including the adoption of legislation and the implementation of relevant policies and programs. Morocco notes in particular the launch of a national strategy for human rights and citizenship and the related plan of action. In a constructive spirit, Morocco wishes to make the following recommendations. First, accelerate efforts to establish a national mechanism for implementation, reporting, and follow-up. Second, continue initiatives to bring the laws governing the National Human Rights Commission in line with the Paris Principles. And third, implement the national anti-corruption strategy with a view to promote good governance and sustainable development. We wish the delegation of Guinea-Bissau full success in this UPR. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. I call on Mozambique. Vice President, thank you. Mozambique warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Guinea-Bissau and commends the comprehensive presentation of the human rights situation in the country. In a spirit of constructive engagement and solidarity, Mozambique makes the following recommendations. 1, fully implement legislation criminalizing all forms of gender-based violence, including by increasing resources and strengthening the justice system. 2, continue efforts to expand access to justice programs beyond the capital. 3, take stronger action to combat corruption, which undermines democratic governance and stability in society. And 4, address political instability to facilitate the effective implementation of human rights legislation and reforms initiatives. Mozambique wishes Guinea-Bissau every success in this UPR process. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. A continuación.
Thank you. I call on Namibia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Namibia extends a warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks them for their comprehensive report. We commend Guinea-Bissau for taking significant steps to submit overdue reports to treaty bodies as recommended during the third cycle, notably reports under the ICCPR, CRC, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, among others. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we wish to respectfully offer the following recommendations. 1, consider establishing a national human rights institution in full compliance with the Paris Principles. 2, consider ratifying the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. And 3, take effective measures to address the cultural beliefs underlying the harmful practice of female genital mutilation with a view to its complete elimination. In conclusion, we wish Guinea-Bissau a successful fourth review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Nepal.
Madam Vice President, Nepal welcomes the delegation of Republic of Guinea-Bissau to the fourth cycle of UPR and thanks them for presenting the national report. We appreciate Guinea-Bissau's commitment to the protection and promotion of human rights and its efforts to implement the recommendations of the last UPR. We take good note of the measures taken towards biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation and adaptation. In a constructive spirit, Nepal recommends Guinea-Bissau the following. 1, continue efforts to increase women's representation in the decision-making systems. 2, scale up measures to reduce gender pay gap and promote decent work. 3, further strengthen the child protection system reduce school dropout rate, and ensure access to quality education for all. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of Guinea-Bissau for its presentation of its national report. The Netherlands notes the progress made since the third cycle, but is concerned about the restrictions on the freedom of expression and the increased violence against journalists. In addition, further measures would be welcome to revise the 2010 Basic Education Law in order to ensure improved access to education, particularly for children in rural areas. The Netherlands therefore recommends 1. To effectively implement measures to counter violence against children, including child marriage, female genital mutilation, and human trafficking, and 2. To take concrete measures to promote women's participation in politics, governance, and business, and to implement the national policy for gender equality and equity. The Netherlands wishes Guinea-Bissau success with the follow-up of all the recommendations it receives during this fourth UPR cycle. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Panama.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Vice President. Panama wishes to greet the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report. In a spirit of cooperation and a constructive spirit, we recommend the following: to ensure that necessary financial resources are allocated to ensure implementation of the National Social Protection Policy, which was recently approved. We also recommend implementing policies and programs which promote gender equality in education, eliminating those barriers which prevent girls from going to school, such as child marriage, early pregnancy, and harmful social practices, making it easier to once again include teenage mothers in school and ensuring there is a safe school environment for all. We also recommend adopting water and sanitation policies at the national level, ensuring a human rights-based approach, tackling essential aspects for health, safety and well-being for women, children, persons with disabilities and older persons, and to make a contribution to preventing waterborne diseases. We wish Guinea-Bissau the best of success in this fourth UPR cycle. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of the Philippines.
Philippines extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau. We commend the concrete steps taken by the government to strengthen domestic institutions and normative frameworks during the review period, notwithstanding challenges and resource constraints. We particularly acknowledge the ratification of ILO Convention No. 87 and adoption of a comprehensive national human rights strategy and action plan. In a constructive spirit, allow us to offer the following recommendations. 1. Ensure robust enforcement of laws against gender-based violence, particularly domestic violence, female genital mutilation, and child marriage, and enhance access to justice and support services to victims and survivors. 2. Endeavor to provide adequate resources for the effective implementation of the action plan to combat human trafficking. And 3. Step up measures to reduce school dropout rates, especially among girls in rural areas, and strengthen community-based interventions for improved maternal and child health outcomes. The Philippines wishes Guinea-Bissau every success in this review process. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Portugal. Ambassador.
Señora Vicepresidenta.
Vice President, Portugal warmly welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and notes the cooperation among the national, between the national institutions and civil society on the report. We note the National Human Rights and Citizenship Strategy and the Aarhus Convention, which Guinea-Bissau has now joined. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that Guinea-Bissau, 1, ensure effective implementation of legislation criminalizing all violence against children, including child marriage, FGM, and gender-based violence. 2, address trafficking in human beings at the institutional level with the national strategy against trafficking. And 3, step up efforts to combat poverty, ensuring universal access to basic essential services with increased investment in education, health and social protection, particularly in rural areas and among vulnerable groups. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success in this review. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Vice President. We thank Guinea-Bissau for presenting the report. We commend the efforts to implement the recommendation for the third cycle, including the development of the National Strategy on Human Rights and Citizenship and the relevant plan of action to 2026. In this context, we welcome the measures to develop the national system of human rights institutions, including the creation of the Office of the Ombudsman with the function of the National Human Rights Institution. We recommend that efforts continue to develop the National Human Rights Institutions. We note the positive effect of the government's steps to improve the justice system and conditions for pretrial detention, as well as increased access to free medical care and education. This is important. Additional efforts need to be made by the government to improve the operation of the prison system, when we recommend that measures continue to be taken to overcome prison overcrowding. We hope that the November elections are held in strict compliance with the law and with respect for basic rights and freedoms. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda.
Thank you, Madam President. Rwanda welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks Guinea-Bissau for presenting its national report. Rwanda commends the government of Guinea-Bissau for the ongoing amendments of various legal instruments to further enhance the promotion and protection of human rights. We further commend Guinea-Bissau for its commitment to human rights and climate change, notably by joining the West and Central Africa Alliance in 2024, acceding to the Aarhus Convention in 2023, and holding its first national dialogue on environment in 2024 that offered a unique opportunity to collectively assess environmental challenges and further underscored the urgent need to protect biodiversity. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Rwanda would like to make the following recommendation. Bolster efforts to strengthen the capacity of the National Human Rights Commission in order to align its functioning with the Paris Principles. In conclusion, Rwanda wishes Guinea-Bissau a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Kingdom's mission welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and thanks them for the submission of their comprehensive national report, and we commend their commitment to cooperation with international human rights mechanisms, and we commend the efforts by Guinea-Bissau to improve the national health system, including the preparation of a national action plan on health for the period 2023-2027 to improve health coverage and primary health care, especially in rural areas. In a constructive spirit, we recommend first to pursue the development of the health infrastructure and to expand basic services in accordance with the needs of the rural population. Second, to pursue the implementation of national strategies related to the integration of persons with disabilities in education to support in an inclusive and supportive manner. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Senegal. Madam Vice President, Senegal wishes to greet the delegation of the sister country of Guinea-Bissau, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report as part of this fourth UPR cycle. My country commends the efforts the country's made since the previous cycle. We see this particularly in 2022 by the adoption of a strategy and a national plan of action on human rights, and by the fact that many reports were submitted to the treaty bodies. We also commend the Guinea-Bissau authorities for the adoption of a national strategy for the inclusion of persons with disabilities and the putting in place of a national strategy for inclusive education. In a constructive spirit, my delegation wishes to make the following recommendations. to continue to invest in improving school infrastructure and promoting inclusive quality education. Secondly, we recommend continuing efforts to train medical staff and renovate health infrastructure. To conclude, Senegal wishes Guinea-Bissau the best of success in the implementation of the recommendations it accepts. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to the delegation of Sierra Leone.
Madam Vice President, my delegation welcomes the Guinea-Bissau delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. We commend the government of Guinea-Bissau for implementing a number of child protection policies aimed at addressing the challenges faced by vulnerable children, in particular the Taliban and refugee children. We welcome the adoption of the National Strategy for Inclusion Education in March 2023 and the education sector for 2017-2025. These initiatives represent important steps towards promoting the inclusion of persons and children with disabilities in the education sector. In this regard, we offer the following recommendations. 1. Consider extending free education to the third cycle of primary education, grades 7 to 9, and secondary education from grades 10 to 12. 2. Explore and implement innovative financing mechanisms to ensure the sustainability of free education for children, possibly drawing on models such as the International Finance Facility for Education and other public-private partnerships. 3. Consider to ratify the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture. Sierra Leone wishes the delegation a successful review, and I thank you, Vice President. Obrigado.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Slovenia commends Guinea-Bissau for its commitment to the UPR process. We note the adoption of several policy documents by the government, including the National Human Rights Plan, the updated National Strategy on Combating Female Genital Mutilation, and National Policy for Comprehensive Protection of Children. We remain concerned over the reports of women and girls facing multiple forms of discrimination and violence, including female genital mutilation, child marriage, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. We are further concerned by the reports of intimidation, harassment, threats, and attacks targeting human rights defenders, lawyers, and journalists. In a constructive spirit, we recommend Guinea-Bissau to 1. Strengthen its effort to effectively implement laws and policies to prevent discrimination and violence against women and girls, including female genital mutilation and child marriage. And 2. To strengthen legal protection for journalists and human rights defenders, and to ensure they can work in the environment without fear of reprisals. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. My delegation welcomes the distinguished delegation of Guinea-Bissau to this UPR session. South Africa commends Guinea-Bissau for strengthening its United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework for the period 2022 to 2026, with a particular focus on the protection of human rights and the adoption of the measures to facilitate access to justice. Similarly, we welcome the approval of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy for the period 2021 to 2030. South Africa wishes to respectfully recommend that Guinea-Bissau put measures in place to guarantee the independence of the National Human Rights Commission to monitor the state's human rights obligations. Secondly, establish effective mechanisms for investigating all allegations of human rights violations, ensuring that perpetrators are identified and held accountable in accordance with the law. Thirdly, mainstream the rights of persons with disabilities in concrete actions set out in public and macroeconomic policies. South Africa wishes the sister country of Guinea-Bissau a successful review. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Spain.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Spain welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we thank them for taking part in this exercise. We welcome the fact that in 2022, a national strategy and a plan of action on human rights were adopted. Nevertheless, in a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1, to set up a national human rights institution pursuant to the Paris Principles. 2, to fully guarantee freedom of expression of the press and of peaceful assembly, amongst others, repealing the government decree of January 2024, which suspends the right to demonstrate, and revising the law on freedom of the press in line with international standards. 3, we recommend putting an end to intimidation, arbitrary detention and attacks against defenders, journalists, judicial officials and opponents who exercise their work, and adopting a national law for protecting human rights defenders. And 4, ensuring the effective implementation of the Equality Law of 2018, the law against domestic violence and the law against FGM of 2018. Thank you.
Cedo la palabra al
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of Sudan.
Shukran. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Sudan welcomes the sisterly delegation of Guinea-Bissau and praises the progress achieved in the legal framework, which include the adoption of the labor law, as well as the adoption of the national strategy on human rights and the national development plan, as well as the strategy to combat corruption and the strategy on the prison sector. We recommend to pursue the promotion of the legal and legislative framework to promote and protect the rights of children. Second, to pursue efforts on the legal and institutional level for the benefit of persons with disability. Third, to pursue national policies and programs to implement the Sustainable Development Agenda, to combat poverty, to put an end to unemployment of youth, and to provide services of education, health, potable water, and sanitation to its people. We wish Guinea-Bissau all success in this period. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Switzerland extends a cordial welcome to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau and wishes to make the following recommendations. 1, to guarantee the full exercise of the right to freedom of expression by ensuring that violations and crimes committed against journalists and media workers are subject to impartial investigations and prosecution, and that the perpetrators are held accountable. 2, ensure the full respect of the right to free and peaceful assembly without excessive use of force by putting in place effective mechanisms of investigation in order to bring the perpetrators to justice in case of violations. 3, take necessary measures to guarantee free, transparent, inclusive elections in line with international standards. 4, to continue efforts to implement the prohibition of female genital mutilation and to put in place a strategy to train all stakeholders who are involved in combating this practice. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thailand welcomes Guinea-Bissau's adoption of the National Strategy and Action Plan on Human Rights, on the inclusion of persons with disability, on social protection policy, and the law prohibiting female genital mutilation. We also commend the efforts to promote community-level health programs, including on maternal and reproductive health and inclusive education. Thailand recommends 1, take concrete measures to combat school dropout rates, especially among girls in primary education. 2, continue to strengthen primary health care in underserved areas by enhancing community-based approaches and reinforcing the connection between community health efforts and formal health services. 3, strengthen regulatory and enforcement frameworks to ensure that private sector activities, including in forestry and natural resource extraction, are conducted with respect to business and human rights and taking into account the impacts on environment and health. We wish Guinea-Bissau a successful review. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Timor-Leste.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Timor-Leste warmly welcomes the delegation from Guinea-Bissau. We'd like to thank you for your informative report. We commend Guinea-Bissau on adopting the National Social Protection Policy and Strategy 2025-2029 and for developing the National Human Rights and Citizenship Strategy along with its corresponding plan of action for 2022 to 2026. We also welcome the amendments made in 2022 to the statutes of the National Human Rights Commission adopted by the government cabinet in November of 2024 and which align the institution with the Paris principles. In a constructive spirit, Timor-Leste recommends that Guinea-Bissau 1 take urgent measures to combat the trafficking of children, 2 step up cooperation between the state's social services institutions and civil society agents in order to provide timely support to the victims of trafficking. 3, promote universal education through awareness-raising campaigns on the right of children to education. And 4, step up birth registration campaigns in order to ensure that all children are registered. We wish Guinea-Bissau every success. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Togo. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Togo welcomes the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we take note of their report. Togo welcomes the efforts made by Guinea-Bissau in implementing the recommendations. We also welcome the adoption of the National Plan to Prevent and Combat Trafficking for 2024 to 2028. Nevertheless, in a constructive spirit, we wish to make the following recommendations to Guinea-Bissau. 1, to ensure the implementation of the National Strategy to Combat Corruption, which was adopted in 2021, by putting in place effective measures for prevention and repression. 2, to take effective measures to ensure the right to housing and guarantee women's access to real estate and property. To conclude, my delegation wishes the best of success to Guinea-Bissau in implementing the recommendations from this review. Thank you. I recognize Tunisia.
شكرا سيدي نائب الرئيس. يرحب وفد
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of my country wishes to welcome the delegation of Guinea-Bissau, and we thank them for the presentation of their comprehensive report. We welcome the large number of reforms and laws that have been put in place to strengthen human rights mechanisms, such as the Human Rights Plan and the Plan of Action on Justice, and the improvement of detention conditions, in combating corruption and trafficking. We also welcome measures taken to broaden social coverage, to combat poverty and promote the rights of women and children and persons with disabilities. We would like to make the following recommendations: to continue efforts to bring about even greater gender equality and promoting the rights of women. Secondly, to take measures to speed up ratification of the law to provide comprehensive child protection based on the principle of the best interest of the child, and to pursue efforts, ongoing efforts to combat corruption. And we wish Guinea-Bissau the best of success. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list for this review. And I therefore give the floor back to the delegation of Guinea-Bissau so that they can make any comments and deliver their concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Firstly, I would like to extend my thanks to all members of the Council for their participation in this debate. Indeed, we have taken careful note of all the recommendations made by the various states, and we will analyze them to see which are the most relevant. And then we will indicate our position on them. I would like to refer to the recommendation concerning raising the legal minimum age for marriage. It is 18 in the law, but when it comes, this is through the Comprehensive Child Protection Code, but we are awaiting the final adoption of that code in order to ensure that the legal minimum age for marriage is 18. So it's when that is adopted that we will have the minimum age of 18 then in the law. I would also like to refer to the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. We have already started our efforts, and implementation of that strategy also enabled us to adopt Decree 9 of 2018 on the recovery of assets. And that law on the recovery of assets is a way of combating crime and ensuring it doesn't pay for perpetrators. So not only are we combating the crime itself, but also trying to ensure that we recover the assets obtained through crimes. Recently, we confiscated several aircraft and other items which have now reverted to the state. So the comprehensive strategy to combat crime and the national anti-corruption strategy are being implemented. So we have this comprehensive plan to combat crime and reduce risks. And through this, we have the Bureau for the Recovery of Assets. This means to say that we have instruments in the country which act as a deterrent to the perpetration of crime, the commission of crimes. So prison sentences are handed down, and furthermore, the material gains are confiscated through the asset recovery strategy. So I would like to thank you. I believe that this has been a very constructive dialogue, rather like the one we had in 2020. We have taken note, and we will now undertake the necessary measures to pursue those recommendations as we did with the third cycle ones. We will look to see how best we can handle the recommendations arising from this debate. We'll see how they are aligned with the circumstances in the country. We will try to make sure that we can implement them using the resources we have available. I would like to thank all the members of the council and the troika of rapporteurs. I would also like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the support provided for us to participate in this dialogue. Notably, support was provided so that a delegate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could take part. This was through the funding of the air ticket and accommodation for that delegate. This enables us to gain more experience and also to adopt best practices for the future. I would also like to thank the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, which provided the necessary funds for 2 members of the delegation to take part in this dialogue. So this was the way in which our delegation was able to be here today. Thank you very much. I would like to also thank you, Madam Vice President and the Secretariat, for stewarding this dialogue. The President. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the dialogue for attending and taking part in this review. The report on the review will be drafted by the members of the Troika. They are the representatives of Kyrgyzstan, Malawi, and the plurinational state of Bolivia. In line with the procedure in force since 2015, the recommendations section will be distributed at 12:30 p.m. on Tuesday, 6th of May, and its adoption is scheduled for Wednesday, 7th of May at 3:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be distributed by email on Friday, 16th of May 2025. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We'll meet again this afternoon at 3:30. Consider the adoption of the recommendations section on the draft reports of Kyrgyzstan, Kiribati, Guinea, the Lao People's Democratic Republic, and Spain. I hereby adjourn the 9th meeting of the 49th session of the UPR Working Group. Thank you very much.
you.